right, we'll get started. So, welcome everybody to Numbers Therapy, episode 40. Wow. Today's episode titled Inside the Rise of a Web3 Artist. It will be aptly named as we go through this episode. The purpose of Numbers Therapy, of course, is to talk through the macro, operational, financial, technical, trading-based, and other dimensions of Web3. We're putting the pieces together to help everyone understand the latest picture. We continue to elevate while also hearing some incredible backstories and having some good laughs along the way, which I am confident we will do today. For everyone who's listening live, of course, please feel free to ask questions within guest questions, even if it's a more intro question or more advanced. If it's intro, there are probably other people thinking it. If it's more advanced, also okay. We'll try to answer it for you as well. Be for sure monitoring it along the way. And lastly, Numbers Therapy, of course, is rated NFA, as in not financial advice. So, without further ado, and on to today's guest and episode. For many of us listening live, Web3 truly represented reinvention, a path to build on what you've already known and apply it in a truly dynamic, democratic, community-supportive way. Pool flippers become minters, hustlers become mini VCs, entrepreneurs become community leads and adjacent service business owners. Yes, today the story makes sense in hindsight, but it for certain was not the linear road there. Throughout the past 2+ years, today's guest has sprinkled his creativity in a very careful and methodical manner, getting rewarded for his patience, feel, and ability to be alert to buyer behavior. This has led to both a successful and majorly compounded growth path that has brought a range of partnerships, possibly unexpected technological innovation, and even a road to Sothebys, as we all know. Whether you're an artist or an art collector or not, and I for one am not, you will undoubtedly appreciate today's guest's story and the parallels and lessons it has even beyond art. Very glad to be sitting here with you all, hearing his story, and to have him as a friend and contact. Please, everyone, welcome Pop Wonder to the stage, everyone. What's going on, Pop?
Hoy hoy. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
For sure. Really excited to have you on. So let's maybe start with a bit of foundation first, as that's what we love to do in here. Can you give us the backstory on where your attention was focused before Web3, before NFTs came into your life?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically grown up as a doodler and interested in art, but when I was about, I'd say 12 years old, I was introduced to the bass guitar, and that pretty much took over my life for the next 25 or so years. And I ended up going to music school and getting a well-rounded education, and started working as a bass player, and got to do lots of cool stuff, play with some great artists, and kind of dig my heels into the local music scene here in Portland, Oregon. And that all was going great up until around 2020, when, as we all know, a lot of those opportunities went away. I was getting ready to go on the road with my band, the Portland Cello Project, for most of the year. And the other side work that I had been doing was in graphic design, mostly for bands and venues. And that went away as well. So I found myself just kind of like tripling down basically on my visual art and designs, and trying, with the new time that I had, trying to create something for myself as well that could be, more of an independent art career. And so I just kind of kept trucking along until hearing about Web3 and crypto art and things like that.
Very cool. So before I want to hear a little bit more about that background, because I feel like it's one that not everybody is experienced or is familiar with. I certainly haven't. Before we get to that, I'm just curious to frame this conversation too. When you're creating either music or art, how you tend to think about it is like, what is it that I think would be really pleasing and delight myself, to possibly delight others? Like, is that the orientation you take on it, that of what inspires you?
Yeah, and as a musician, my role has been more of a hired gun and utility kind of player, learning other people's music. You get to put your own creativity into that as well, but it's all mostly like what serves the music and what's needed for the role of a bass player. But, you know, a lot of my influences and things that I like make their way into that as well. And it ties in with art too, because it's for me personally, it's a lot more of a creative endeavor. And I really focused on, when I started making this, you know, pop Wonderworld stuff that most people see today, that was really just for me. And the only thing I really thought about is, like, if other people would like it, is if I could create some sort of a cohesive and personal voice or style, then hopefully that would resonate with certain people. And it may not be right for everybody, but the people that do resonate with it would like it that much more, because it would be so specific, and they would kind of know like where I was coming from and what to expect from me.
Cool. That creates like a really, I feel like, great frame, even for us non-artists. I think that's just really cool to hear that. So before we get, you know, in that direction, can you paint the picture in terms of what is it like being a musician, right? And then I guess in your case, it sounds like you had success with gigs, but I'm also curious about what was it like being a musician in, say, 2020, even prior to, you know, the rise of the creator economy, when that wasn't as much of a thing at that point.
Yeah, I've always had a pretty like humble, you know, view on it. I was always pretty much a support person, but so mostly I was kind of like trying to help other people achieve what they were trying to achieve with their music career. But for me, I just viewed it as a job where I get up and I do it every day. And if you're cool to hang around with and good at what you do, I think I'm a much better bass player than I am even an artist. But you know, there's different kinds of opportunities out there for different things. But you know, as long as I was like, it really comes down to being good at what you do, showing up on time, being cool to hang around with, and then you can kind of cobble together a little career there. So that's what I did.
Very cool. I guess maybe in the future I'll avoid asking whether you're going to have audio incorporated into your NFTs at some point. We'll maybe gloss over that later. At the time that COVID happened, as you mentioned, and what was that? Everyone had their own experience, of course, right? It was difficult for a lot of people, and you know, we've heard lots of stories about that. But for you, I imagine even more magnified, right? So, what was that like when that happened at that time? Like, what was your reaction at that point? Did you react, or were you kind of sitting a little bit and like thinking through the next steps and distilling? How did that go for you?
Yeah, if you remember, a lot of people kind of were like, "Oh, this is going to be a couple weeks or a couple months," but I kind of got the feeling right away that it was going to be more like a couple of years. And so I knew that I had already been really exploring the visual side of things for the last, you know, few years before that. And I was like, well, now I can create my like little storefront and my t-shirt designs and these things that I always wanted to do, but didn't quite have the time because I was either working on client work or playing music. So I really did like it was like my last gig was on Wednesday. By Friday, everything was shut down. By Monday, I started working on a deck of playing cards. I set up my website. I put up any designs that I've been working on, and I just knew, okay, well, music will always be there. A lot of my friends were doing like the live streaming thing, which was cool, but I also knew that people's attention span wasn't going to last long enough for that to be sustainable. You know, people were tuning in and supporting and throwing them $10 on Venmo and things like that, but you know, that's only going to really keep their attention for so long. So I knew like there will be gigs again in the future. I've already put in the work to like become a competent bass player. So let me just like dive right into this thing where I can, you know, hopefully create another little stream of income and also kind of promote my design work to be able to get more and bigger clients. So it was I pretty much just dove right into it. I wanted to tell my friends and colleagues that were playing music, like, it's probably a good idea to find something else to do. But I also didn't want to sound condescending or like I didn't believe that they could do it. But, that's just the feeling I had at the time.
Something. That's really, really something. And I totally understand where you're coming from on that. I mean, I not to be overlooked is the fact while everyone else was probably like sitting there not clear, or maybe sitting there like flipping rolls of toilet paper as their grocery store went out, you quickly pivoted to a totally other business really, really fast, which is just, that's really awesome, man. It's really, really cool to hear. So before we get into the the Web3 side of things, which of course we all want to talk about, it sounds like you had a very good sense of foundation at that point in terms of your North Star was, right, towards, let's call it, happiness. What was that foundation like? What was your lens in terms of going to fulfill me, what I really care about in my life? Like, can you share what that lens was, and I assume how it then framed everything else you did?
Yeah, well, already since like 2017, I had like quit my day job and only was working for myself, playing music, doing design work, and I knew that I had to continue that. And I also had at the time a 6-month-old daughter, and I knew like I didn't want to go get a job again, which at that time was also very hard. Would have been very hard. So I was like, well, I have to keep hammering at this like freelance creative life. And I'd also, had a bit of a perspective change about being paid by the hour as opposed to being paid for the value that you can provide and by your ideas. And so I was like, I just have to like keep going in that direction. And since I'd already come back to visual art and it was going good for me, like from the moment I started doing design work, I had clients booked up all the time since then. So I knew that even though most of my clients were musicians and they didn't have any income or anything to promote anymore, that I had to like, expand out and find the people who were still doing business and still needed design work. And so I basically just like, hammered on that.
I feel like what's interesting also about what you're saying on top of, how you approached it and everything is that almost sounds like the seeds of how communities are working, especially in Web3 as well, right? Where oftentimes like communities get formed, people see the needs within those communities, and then they build something to be able to serve the needs of those people in the communities. And it's kind of sounds like exactly what you did with your musician community, where not only were you playing with them, but you knew that they had a need as well in design and built a business around that, which then you had to adjust, of course. But yeah, that's really, really cool.
Yeah, that was why I started. Well, I mean, partially because, even if you're doing really well and playing lots of gigs, it's still, there's a cap on like what you can earn and what you can do. And so I also noticed that a lot of the designs I was seeing that were promoting people's shows and their albums and things like that were not great. So I would do a poster for free for my friends' bands, and I would do my own posters, and that just, the word of mouth just spread from there.
Very cool. That's very, very cool. Okay, so now we got the foundation down, and not a ideal situation that you very quickly, it sounds like, pivoted and solved, in COVID. And how did you intersect with NFTs at that point? What was the initial stimulus that kind of caught NFTs for you, and what was your reaction at the time when you heard about it?
Sure. Well, like shortly after the lockdown happened, I started making these drawings that people know me for now, and it was kind of an answer to A, having more time, and B, really, really wanting to do something that didn't have like a client attached to it or notes, like any kind of preconceived notions. So just as pure as I could make. And so the reason I say that is because I did that for about a year just to post stuff on Instagram and just to, have a creative output. And then my buddy, he's Muse Bandit on Twitter. He's a bass player here in Portland too, where we've been homies for a long time. We kind of chatted about crypto a couple times over the years, and then he hit me up like January 2021, said, sent me some articles. Here's this, drop that happened. Here's what people are doing. Here's what super rare is. Here's what OpenSea is. And yeah, I didn't even wait a second. I was like completely in, looking on all this stuff. He was helping me out on how to set the things up and how to mint artwork. And within a couple of weeks, I had some pieces up, and I had a new Twitter account, and I was going for it.
Amazing. So they've been pretty atypical compared to the stories, or many of the stories that we hear in here, as you might imagine, or people that maybe heard about it in a similar way from a friend or something, but oftentimes they're going from the investor or the trader side and playing with it and that kind of a thing. And so yours is a little bit different in that sense, which is really cool to hear. And so before we get into more of that and how you released, which I definitely want to talk about, I'm just curious, outside of even Web3, right? There's so many directions you can take for art, right? In terms of your style and what you're creating and everything. Can you give a bit of backstory in terms of how you landed on this style of art specifically? I'd love to know if there is a backstory on that.
Yeah, totally. I went through a few years of experimental phase, learning the various softwares. I was really into typography. I got really into hand lettering. So, weeks at a time, I would just be writing Crayolinography, which is calligraphy with Crayola markers. And, and then I would, make these digital designs and do this and that. So I was all over the place with my style, but I always kind of knew I like to make, cartoony, fun stuff. And then when I decided to start this Instagram account, basically, I said, okay, well, I need to dial it in because I really like certain artists. And why do I like these artists? Well, they have very defined style. Their color palettes, are very cohesive. So when you look at their Instagram page, it's just a nice wall of amazing images. And when one of those pops up in your feed, it's them immediately. And it's so I want that for myself. And so I just decided on the subject matter, which is, aliens, alien landscapes, outer space stuff, monsters, but all cartoony and kind of, most of the time, kind of fun situations. And so I just started knocking those out. And at the time I was already getting up at 4 a.m. because that was the best time for me with a small child to be able to get some stuff done before she got up. And also as soon as I started doing it, I realized how beneficial it was for focus and getting in the flow state. And it's not for everybody because people's brains work differently. But for me, first thing when I wake up, no matter what time it is, I'm ready to go. I got lots of energy. I got lots of focus. Some of the things that the executive dysfunction things that I deal with normally throughout normal days, it doesn't really happen to me at that time. So I pretty much did that for 2 years straight, waking up at 4. And a lot of these pieces came from that. Most of them came from that time. And I do think that influenced the kind of weird nature of them and the way I was able to crank them out. So, that's basically, so I did that for a year while I was doing anything else I could to earn money and grow my design studio.
That's a really cool story. I'm like you. I'm also an early person, but I also imagine that at least a handful of the people listening live or otherwise are probably thinking to themselves, just WTF at this point, 4 a.m. 4 a.m. is it's a little early even for me, to be honest with you. I'm an early person, but I can imagine.
If you got, if you don't have a kid and your brain does work great at night and maybe you stay up late and draw, it's the same thing really, as long as you just do it. But yeah, so I definitely, if people tell me they're struggling with like getting stuff done, I'll recommend it to them. But if somebody says I can never do that, I say maybe not. Everybody's different.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So I'm really excited. I mean, you sprinkled a couple seeds here, but I'm really excited to talk about kind of your first foray into possibly selling within this space. And when you and I talked about it, it became really evident that you were kind of treating it like pretty methodically and a bit like an experiment to some extent. Can you talk about what that was like and how you released it and how you were thinking about it and that kind of a thing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I kind of just definitely went with like instincts on it. I knew that I didn't want to just like put out all 20, or like I had more than 20 pieces, but like put out 20 pieces at once or whatever. But I definitely wanted to put out like 5 so that people had a choice of one. So that's what I did. I just did one of ones. I did like 5 of them. And this is very atypical, but I minted them and I woke up in the morning and 2 of them had sold. And so that like gave me a ton of confidence and validation that I was on the right track. I mean, that's something, it's not a piece of advice I can give. That doesn't usually happen, but it happens. So
this was when, by the way, like what was the, if you remember?
February 15th, 2021.
2021. Yeah, that was a good time. That makes a lot of sense. So you put up the 5 pieces. What were you thinking when you put up the 5 pieces, by the way? Were you just like, can't hurt and we'll see what happens? Or did you have data before that from Instagram, for instance, validate and suggest like you think it's probably going to sell? Like, how do you think about it?
No, I did not know. It was just like, might as well. I'm already selling t-shirts and stuff. Maybe I can sell these other pieces of art. I'd like post them on Reddit. This was like before Reddit was so against NFTs that you couldn't even breathe a word of it. But like I would post them there and I mean, and then I just was on Twitter and I was just using Twitter like any other social media. It wasn't just about selling. It was just like, here's what I'm working on, how, what's going on, how's everybody doing? Started making friends. A big thing that happened too was Clubhouse was very big at the time, and I got hooked up with some really great artists, and we started like a little group called the Lowbrow Art Collective. It was Russ Moreland, Lurk Loves You on Twitter, amazing artist and a good friend of mine. He started that up, and we, at that time people were still pretty much inside. So we were hanging out like every single day in there, talking and educating each other, and not only on blockchain stuff, but just art in general, and just making those connections. And then we pop over to the other rooms, and sometimes they would, you could promote your work, and that stuff always didn't always have tons of results, but you were doing it, you're putting in the work. And so I just basically, and everything was so fascinating to me that it was not hard to be on Twitter and Clubhouse all the time because I was so into it. And also when I started collecting a little bit of work, it gives you more perspective on how to release your own work. Because, for instance, I had accidentally bought a piece that I thought was a one of one, but it was an edition, right? So because you're new and you're not reading the stuff correctly. And so I knew early on, even way before I did editions, if I do, they're going to be in a separate collection so that people don't get confused. And that also so that in my one of one collection, the floor price stays, at one of one levels, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's super interesting. So, but you bought your first art, it sounds like, after you made this piece release. Is that right? Do I have that?
Yeah. Like I had a little bit of ETH, and so I started kind of like, I bought some PFPs and I bought some art and some different stuff. Yeah.
That's really, really cool. I feel like that's very, very uncommon. I can imagine like most people would be like, oh, let me buy something, see what the experience is like, whatever. You're like, fuck it. I'm just going to list 5 really smartly, wake up the next morning, sells, and then you refine it afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't have, before I did this, I didn't have enough like money to even play around with. Like I bought about $40 worth of ETH so I could, or maybe it's a little bit more actually at the time with gas fees, but so I could do this stuff and it was just like, like that was it. And so once I got some ETH, I was like, okay, now this is like kind of play money, which if there's any artists out there, it's not. You have to take care of it and keep track of it. I learned the hard way on a lot of that, but yeah. So, and I ended up, I mean, I have like about 1,000 NFTs now because I'm super into it. I really like supporting smaller artists too, and just buying an edition when I can, things like that.
Super cool. That's super cool. So, all right. So, in terms of process timing here, right? So you put your 5 up, 2 sold. You wake up, you're surprised. I assume the rest sold shortly after would be my guess. What happened next at that point? And what was your plan from there? Was, as you saw that was happening, was it just, I have these other designs and art that's sitting there. I'm going to release them shortly after. And mass release, was it slow and steady? How did you think about it afterwards?
Yeah, so I didn't sell anything else for about a month. But I just kind of kept my spirits up, and it was easy because I had the sales under my belt, and yeah, like slowly but surely, little heat here and there, and they would pop off and they would sell every now and again. And yeah, I was still doing client design work and doing what else. It didn't seem like it was amazing, but it didn't, wasn't quite like a full-time job yet. But then I would like make a new piece. I'd probably about 50-50 make a new piece or pick something from the archive to put up. And at a certain point, I settled in on the price of like 0.49. They seem to be going good at that. And then at a certain point, I'd put it up, and within like an hour, it would be sold.
Oh.
And I did that. And I would do like once a week or so. And then I'd start doing some additions because I came up with a piece that didn't seem like it quite fit in the regular collection. And I was like, maybe this is a good time to do an addition. And I did an addition of 20, and I sold maybe like 13 like right away, like that night. And I was like, okay, this seems like promising. And it's a little easier than selling a one-of-one. So like I can work this into my whole thing. But really my whole like plan of what to do next was just put out art. People seem to like the art. At a certain point, once I got more notoriety and PFPs started popping off, people would ask me, why don't you do a PFP, or would you like to do a PFP with us? And I turned it down because I had already started seeing like how the artist could be kind of tied down to that and like have a lot of expectations on them and things like that. But I knew, I was looking at artists like Xcopy and not to compare myself with them, but I was like, they're doing it right. They're just, and they spent years just selling pieces for $8 and $16 and stuff. So that's why, one of the reasons why they have the luxury of being, just laying back, putting out a piece, laying back again, charge up those creative juices again. So that was kind of like my goal, is to just put out work at my own pace and sell it, and just keep hanging out and like vibing with everybody, because that was, at the time too, like everything was changing so much, and you just had to, keep on Twitter and be like, well, okay, what's the new thing? What's going on? So yeah, I didn't have a real plan except for I just wanted to release art.
What's funny about that, I feel like, is, I feel like the perception partly might have been for folks on like the investing and trading side that like, investors and traders are always monitoring what's going on, what's the trends, what's the alpha, right? Like, or what's the meta, like all that kind of good stuff, right? And I feel like the perception might have been for artists that they're just kind of producing what they produce, when in reality, like, I mean, you're as studied gets, right? And clearly thinking about what the market wants, in addition to like in conjunction with what you produce and what you like to produce as well, right? And it just, it sounds like not like vastly changing what you're producing, at least tinkering about how you approach the market and what the market may want and that kind of a thing. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, totally. And I knew I was just gonna keep on doing like exactly what I want at 4 a.m. because I'm not thinking about I really wasn't thinking about like who would be consuming this. It's just like as I'm walking down the stairs and like a half awake grogginess, I'm like starting to put together the composition and then also when I started doing the editions, I was also collecting PFPs, and like for instance the Gutter Cat Gang, I got a couple of those on the first day of the mint, and then I did a remix, is what I call them, and put that up, and people love that, and I ended up doing quite a few of those, and then that community really took a liking to me because I was like repping their thing. So so that was me taking a look at what was happening, because I had seen people do it with Bored Apes, and at first I was like confused because I didn't know you got the rights to them and stuff, and I was like, how are these people doing this? And then the same deal was with the Gutter Cat, and I was like, well, let me give it a shot, because there's other artists who I admire that are doing similar thing, and maybe, you know, it sounds fun to me, and maybe it'll work. So that was a pretty conscious decision that I made to kind of like, you know, dig into the community and yeah, pay attention to what's going on.
That's very cool. By the way, at the point at which you sold the 13, or you had the collection going, I mean, did you have a following at that point? And also, were you tweeting out or messaging when you had the release? Like, how were people? It sounds like maybe you were partly doing that, but people are also just kind of jumping on it and very on top of what you were doing and just seem to love it. Is that true? What was that?
Yeah,
the following.
It was just like I just slowly got some followers, and I'd tweet out, and I had like the people who collected my one-on-ones, like D's and this guy Squat and Bobby Oxelrod and all these guys, like they were like really big champions of me, and anytime, you know, they would share my stuff and they would tell their friends and in the punk Discord, and you know, once like people with CryptoPunk PFP started like collecting my stuff and following me, I was like, okay, well, they're probably talking behind the scenes, and who knows, but yeah, it all just came from tweeting stuff out, and slowly I got kind of up to like 10K, and by that point it seemed like, you know, there's plenty of people keeping an eye on me to be able to sell stuff.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So, you know, one of the elements of the art market that certainly non-artists always talk about is the idea of like investors versus speculators, right? And that's like a little bit of a funky topic, right? Because sometimes there's a mix, and sometimes people can be both, and that kind of a thing. But I feel like it's always, even pre-Web3, it's always been a part of the art market, right? So I'm curious to hear, what are your thoughts as an artist on the structure of the art buying market, and who buys and why they buy and that sort of thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, one-of-ones and editions much different, because the one-of-one collector is usually a little more serious. But yeah, as soon as you do an edition drop, there's lots of attention from flippers, and you'll see them on there buying one and trying to flip it immediately for just a tiny amount, and then if it doesn't, they're like dropping it until it's below mint, and that's obviously rough for us, because it kind of, you know, it doesn't look great, kind of tanks the value of it, but you know, they're out there. There's no reason to stop them. If royalties are being enforced, then there's upside there. You know, certain collections I've done lately, like Sartoshi's project, it was an edition of 300 free for the minters, and I get the royalties. So, you know, the more action, the better, I guess, in that regard, because that's the only way I'm getting paid from that. But it's a little, I more feel bad when I see like people are minting an open edition expecting for some flip, and then not getting it like literally within 30 minutes and dumping it for less than they bought it for. Because I do think you need to have a bit more of a long-term mindset for some of this stuff. And
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no. And like for instance, my open edition, I didn't hype it up too much, and I told people specifically that it, you know, that it was just for the art. It sold 400. And so that I feel like that collection could be valued more, but there's a lot of people that are just like putting in the bids, getting them for cheaper, trying to sell them, for like even lower than the floor, and it's just kind of like cycle downwards. But that's how it goes. Eventually, but that's the thing. I definitely think eventually it will find its way.
I feel like something you're doing to be able to protect the value of what you're doing, protect everyone's asset values, all that stuff is. I mean, it seems like you're just always, talking and communicating with your community, for lack of a better description, and showing them what you're thinking and engaging with them. And I feel like that in and of itself, it's like really easy right now in this market for people to get a little bit impatient or frustrated, myself included. And in reality, with you staying attached to what you're doing still and communicating with everybody and continuing to have action, and certainly the Sotheby's stuff and even beyond, that increases confidence in everyone, right? That this person really loves what they're doing. They're accessible, and you can kind of connect with them and that they're going to be around, equally importantly, right, for over time. So I think as we all pull out, I agree with what you're saying, and as we all pull out time horizon wise, I think that statement's going to sit very, very well. But I think it seems like you're doing a great job in terms of engaging with everyone and keeping everyone comfortable.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I know, and I knew, like, as that drop was new, I already knew that like Sotheby's was on the horizon, and there's other things at the end of this month that are on the horizon that are, hopefully just going to keep pushing me back upwards, because we've all experienced a lull over the last year. But you got to wait to make those announcements, and because I started here in Web3 and on Twitter, like with my art, really the way I look at it, and so there's really nowhere else for me to go, and it's easy too because I've had some success that there's no reason to leave here. So it's like everything I do is like I'm looking at the big picture 20 years from now too.
I mean, I feel like the takeaway from what you did also is that we've all learned, right, is when the window's open, you didn't sit, you just went at that point, right? You didn't think about it too much. You just went, you tested and went for it. And we all know what it's like to have I don't want to say close, but decline, at least in the past bit of time. That's that many of us will take away next time around as it relates to projects or creating something or whatever else. One of the questions, Pop, that we have from the live crowd is regarding how you spend your time. And I'll make that kind of two parts, which is at the time you were releasing projects and Twitter was starting, how are you thinking about and spending your time at that point? And then equally, how are you spending your time these days as it relates to Web3?
Yeah, well, when I was starting out, I was still doing design work. And like I said, I was spending a ton of time on Clubhouse and Twitter, and obviously drawing a lot. And really, it was really about just paying attention back then too, and it still is. And these days, it's a lot of the same. I try to stay up on everything that's happening in the community and the scene. When I have creative deadlines for stuff that I committed to, I wake up early and do it. A lot of the personal pieces that I create are kind of like on a whim. It'll be just like a random, even at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I'll just get an idea and start sketching it. I spend a lot of time with my daughter. She goes to daycare, so I've got plenty of time to work on the business and stuff. But the rest of the time I'm with my daughter and my wife. We just went to Disneyland last weekend, and we always try to do cool stuff every weekend. And and I'm really enjoying the freedom from having to go to a job, or I still make commitments and I have to do stuff, but and then I work on the business side of things, financial stuff, and I got lots of meetings. I got meetings with tax people and lawyers and potential partnerships and stuff like that. And so it definitely fills on my days.
It sounds like no shortage that exists there. I think part of your background also, or at least you have some thoughts on the multi-chain situation that exists right now. And is that true? Have you spent some time thinking about the multiple chains? And equally, how do you approach that, given the fact that a bit of a split experience still for buyers, right? It's not yet perfectly aggregated, right?
Right. Yeah. So the only other chain that I mint on is Tezos. I'm interested in other stuff, and I have a lot of friends that have been doing other ones like AVAX and Solana and things. But I pretty much April of 2021, so still early on. I think people know the Tezos numbers were still in the 5 digits, so that's how long ago that was. But I was making some sales on ETH, but not like all the time. And some of my friends started doing Tezos, and there was a big community on Clubhouse for that, lots of activity. And I knew that if I wanted to create some work there, that it couldn't be the same work that I was doing on ETH, because people were paying premium money for that. And if all of a sudden they go over to Tezos and see the same style of piece for $100, then it wouldn't, maybe sit well with them. So I was already like really interested in animation. So I started these little, you can see if you go to popwonder.xyz, like the style that I came up with. It's very simple, overlapping shapes that kind of change color when they overlap each other, and then these silly little animations to go along with it. So I started doing those. I was selling them for, at the time, it would maybe like $10 a piece for like an edition of 15 or something. And even then I was like, this is great. Like I make this thing, they're simple style and they're short loops, so it doesn't take me too long, and I can make it, put it out. By the end of the day, I sold way more than if I made a poster for somebody. And like that poster also, that people might come back and say, oh, I don't really like this thing, can you change it? Or this band dropped out, can you put this new band on there? And I have to crack it back open. And then the show comes and goes, and the artwork is gone forever. So these pieces are here forever. And but I was just selling them basically like they were prints in my store. And I was like, this is a great way to make a living too. So yeah, I just stuck with it, and it's been a minute, but I still drop stuff in there now.
Very cool. That's very, very cool. I tried to get a refund or an exchange on an attribute on one of my NFTs I minted recently, but it did not work. So
yeah, right.
I was like, that's not a possibility. So one of our live audience folks have another question coming up. So the question is, where do you get your news on what is happening in the space? And do you follow or enjoy other projects or Web3 games in the space, or do you mostly focus on collecting from artists?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much get my news just from the Twitter feed. Try to take everything with a grain of salt and see who the info is coming from, but it's a good way to get a general vibe on how everything's going. Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of projects. I'm not super into the gaming side of things yet with it, but I mostly follow artists and collectors and projects that I like. I'm a holder and a fan of quite a few different PFPs, and but yeah, I mean that's basically where I get my info.
Very cool, and identifiable as well. That definitely resonates, I'm sure. So most recently, you got the call from Sothebys to auction one of yours. So first off, congrats on that. That's really awesome, of course.
Thank you.
Can you take us behind how that all went down, what your reaction was to this? Can you give us a little bit of a peek there?
Yeah, I mean, it's really simple. On one of my posts, because my DMs are off, somebody messaged me, hey, I'm from Sotheby's and want to talk, can you DM me? And so I was like, okay.
Make it a more romantic story than that.
I mean, that was it. And so then, and I was kind of a little skeptical. You never know. I get tons of, on Instagram, weird DMs because you can't turn those off. And so I started talking to her. Her name's Jacqueline, and we set up a call and we chatted. And it's pretty straightforward. She just said, if you can have a new piece, by X date, write a little something about it, put it up, sign a contract. So far, it seems like it's going really good. You can't see the bidders like you can on a normal auction, but there's 30 bids. I have no idea how many are, individual bidders or what, but it seems to be going really great with only about halfway done.
That's amazing. That's amazing. It's definitely far simpler of a start than I would have expected from what you said, but that's absolutely amazing that that's the case.
Yeah, some people are like, oh, what kind of weird alpha group are you in where you're getting, like submitting to do this, and it's like I didn't submit. Somebody reached out, so it's mutually beneficial. They want to have artists from the scene in there, and they get a cut and all that stuff. So, it makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's pretty great that it would have been so easy for the auction houses to have like closed, let's call it like antiquated mind on all this stuff. And that's not at all what happened. Obviously, they're a business as well, right? And they want to make money, but they could have taken a very traditional view on art probably and not even touched Web3 whatsoever. And yet they did pretty fast. So I don't know. I think that's really, really cool that they were able to do that. And it's definitely, it definitely helps bolster the space in general. So now as the auction works, like how does it actually work from your perspective? Like, are you basically sitting back and you see the quantity of bids that come in and that's kind of all and they're just managing the rest on their side, including if it's marketing or whatever they're doing, they're just managing the rest. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. I sent them the token right when I minted it. So the provenance is there and they'll transfer it when they make the sale. And, just do some tweets and come and talk about it and stuff like this and do what I can to help, make people aware of it. And we did a little space the other day and that kind of stuff. So it's pretty easy on my end.
That's very cool. I'm sure everyone listening are super curious, I'm sure, to hear what the outcome is and react afterwards. So maybe we'll get the post game in the future as well and hear your reaction to the whole process and everything, which is super cool. But for anybody that's listening now live, we also have recorded listeners later as well. Do you have any tips or thoughts for anyone out there, be them an artist or otherwise, seeking to I guess in quotes grow in the Web3 space? Anything that come to mind?
I mean, for artists, it's basically just, get in there, mix it up, have fun on Twitter, put your art out. You really focus on the art. Honestly, like I like to look inward if I'm having issues. So, if you're not making sales, it takes a long time and maybe you just need to keep working at it and, focus on creating art that's very true to you and that you relate with a lot, so that maybe people who have similar experiences or mindset can also relate to it. And having a cohesive body of work that is recognizable is very important. It doesn't mean that you have to stick to one thing forever, because even though I do have a cohesive style and I use like the same tools a lot so that it has a cohesive look, I can change like one little part or 2-3 little parts of like my system basically, and it still looks like me. And I do still try to evolve in my ideas and my technique. And like, for instance, just this year, I've been more focused on animation because I thought that would be a good way for me to branch out from what I have already been doing. It's more interesting, the workflow for me, and also, I'm focused on like the Sothebys Auction, like having my work in a gallery, and I think that a digital art gallery has screens and therefore can play a video or a GIF, and so I just thought that would be a good way to make my work more interesting to somebody who's viewing it in that context. So basically, my advice is, just like, and also, if you notice, I don't ever post anything, oh yeah, the market's down and this and that, and like, I just kind of, for better or worse, because maybe it's not the right way, but I'm just like showing up another day. Hey, guess what I'm doing? Making art. That's what I'm about. I'm not worried about who's recognizing, my talents or who's buying. And I'm just like, another piece of art. Here we go.
That's cool. That's a great frame of mind to have on it. And not always the easiest, obviously, but but a really great frame of mind to have. I wonder if we're going to look back in the future in like 40 years, and there's going to be like pop wonder periods that exist, like for Picasso or something, right? Where it's like the blue period and the whatever period, and that's what we, as you say, like art's evolving. So I guess last question for you before we wrap up. Just curious, what are your goals, or what are you looking to do in the coming months or years? What should we expect from Pop Wonder, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know, and that's pretty intentional, but one thing is, and who knows where it'll go from here, but I have started painting a little bit, kind of working backwards from a lot of people. A lot of the artists that I know and work with these days are already like amazing painters. And I'm going to see what happens when I try to do my thing in that medium. So that's like brand new to me. Let's see how far I stick with it. But and basically just keep putting out work at a good pace that doesn't oversaturate things as I get more people that are interested in it, and fill out my collection of one-on-ones, because even after 2 years, I probably got about 50 to 60, and I do think that there's room for quite a few more in there, especially as the years go on. So that's really my main goal, is to keep putting out very interesting one-on-ones, and then doing fun stuff. Like just a month ago, I did a piece that was like a bass guitar inspired piece. And I put out a thing on Twitter. Okay, on this day, you submit your video of you playing bass, and then I'll mint you an edition of this, And so like that got the pieces into hands of people who really cared about it and who felt like they earned it in a certain way, and hopefully they'll value it that much more because of that. So, just like fun little things like that, and maybe an edition drop where there's physicals attached to it, or things like that. And then the partnerships that I'm doing, they're few and far between, but usually it's like if I have a relationship with somebody or a project, there might be a collabs and special curated, artist things that I'm involved with there too. And that's where I have my fun.
Amazing. I mean, we knew it was going to land somewhere with music NFTs. We called it as audio earlier in the show. It's bass and bass playing. That's close enough, I guess, right? For the this is really awesome, though. I mean, I'm super appreciative of how much you were able to pull back the curtain and how you think about things and approach them and the story. It was just really, really insightful for me, and I really appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone who's listening live and as well as recorded, as well as is really did it and is going to appreciate it as well. So really thankful to have you on, Pop. Could not have asked for anything more. Everyone listening live, of course, thank you, like always, for your questions and thoughts and feedback and everything. And we'll see you all similar time next week. So thanks so much, everyone, and thanks again, Pop. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.